Maybe you've asked yourself this question. Could two people repopulate the Earth, just two? In other words, if an apocalyptic event destroyed everyone except two people, could the planet be repopulated? Could Adam and Eve have repopulated the Earth? Let's analyze this interesting question. Could we repopulate the Earth with just one couple? The first thing that might come to mind is yes, but their descendants would have to commit incest, and this is true. Obviously, the first new generation would all be brothers and sisters. The second would all be cousins. There's no way to avoid that. Now, the problem with this is that multiple studies have shown that when first or second-degree relatives have children together, the results aren't good. A report that analyzed Czech children born to closely related parents between 1933 and 1970 found higher rates of infant mortality and physical and mental disabilities. Then there's the widespread color blindness on Pingelap Island, caused after a devastating typhoon in the 18th century, left only 20 survivors to repopulate the community. The entire population there now descends from those 20 people. There are also well-known cases from European royalty and their strategic marriages. The most famous, which some may have heard of, is the case of Charles II, King of Spain. His mother and father were niece and uncle. He was physically disabled, mentally retarded, and disfigured. His tongue was so large that it was very difficult for him to speak, and he died senile and plagued by epileptic seizures. Many other studies show the emergence of problems when this type of mixing occurs, but the obvious question you must be asking is, why? Why does this happen? Is it chance? The answer boils down to the fact that when inbreeding occurs, only a small group of genes is shared. In other words, many identical genes are inherited from both parents, making them more prone to genetic diseases. Genetic diversity allows species to overcome problems and avoid changes that occur in the environment. And that's precisely what's lost when close relatives reproduce. Inbreeding goes against the biological goal of mating, which is to mix DNA. Human DNA is grouped into 23 pairs of chromosomes. Within each chromosome, there are hundreds of thousands of genes, and each gene has two copies known as alleles. Genes determine different aspects of your appearance, such as hair and eye color, as well as biological factors like your blood type. These genes are divided into two categories: dominant and recessive. If one of the genes in the pair is dominant, then you get the trait of the dominant gene. However, for traits that originate from the recessive gene, you need both genes to be recessive. For example, the gene for brown eyes is dominant, so having just one of these genes in a pair will result in brown eyes. However, the blue eye gene is recessive, so you'll need both genes to be recessive to get blue eyes. This is important because certain birth defects and genetic diseases are carried by recessive alleles. Therefore, inbreeding increases the chances of being born with such recessive gene conditions. Since couples who are relatives have similar, not identical DNA, carriers of the same recessive gene increase considerably, and that's the reason. The more closely related a family member is, the greater your risk of transmitting diseases. To be more specific, two siblings who have children together have a higher probability of transmitting a recessive disease to their children. But how much more likely? Well, it turns out that two siblings are 50% related. This means that for any given gene, there's a 1 in 4 chance that they have the same copy. This, of course, propagates through generations, but it doesn't mean that all individuals in all generations will have problems. The case of Pingelap Island occurred in the 18th century, with a small genetic group of just 20 people. While initially almost the entire first generation was colorblind, today only a tenth of the island's population is. This could be the answer, then, to how we originated from a single couple hundreds of thousands of years ago, and were not all genetically impaired. It would be if we actually came from a single pair of hominids 300,000 years ago. Don't jump to conclusions. Logic might tell us this: each of us comes from a father and a mother. So, logically, all of humanity must have had a father and a mother. But what we always say is logical doesn't fully work here. What does science know so far? What does science know about our origins? Well, the first mom never met the first dad. And again, don't get impatient. Here's the explanation. Each of us has 23 pairs of chromosomes, making a total of 46. So far, so good, right? But what many don't know is that we have a 47th chromosome that lives in our mitochondria. When some say chromosome 47, not everyone does. It's because mitochondria have their own DNA called mtDNA, and we only inherit it from the mother's egg, not from the father's sperm. Yes, all the mitochondria in your body have been inherited from your mother. Scientists have been able to trace mitochondria back several generations to the first woman who had this special mitochondria about 150,000 years ago in Africa. She is the popular mitochondrial Eve. You've probably heard of her and didn't know exactly what it referred to. Well, this is the answer. Other Homo sapiens women lived with her, of course, but only the lineage of this mitochondrial Eve lives on today. The rest of the women are dead. That's our mom, and we're all related to her. Just as we were able to trace a single lineage of our dear mother humanity because she has special DNA that can't combine with any other, we can also trace our father's lineage with something similar in the y-chromosomes. These are smaller than X-chromosomes and also can't recombine. This characteristic has allowed scientists to molecularly trace our father through generations back to approximately between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago, although it's not well known whether he was in Africa or came from outside after migration. In other words, he's much older than our mother. Like our mother, our father lived with other Homo sapiens of his time, but only his lineage survives until then. To be clear, our parents lived in different eras and never met. In case you thought you needed Adam and Eve for an argument that leaves you the same, you have it in your own ancestors. I know what you're thinking. How is this possible? Well, it's a combination of peculiar genetics with unique evolutionary circumstances and a lot of time. This allowed a fraction of our parents' genes to reach us. That is, a lot of time and mutations. So, going back to the initial question, could two people repopulate the Earth? It's not the same case as what happened hundreds of thousands of years ago. We wouldn't have the same scenario for this couple living at the same time. You can't hope to say, it happened before, we can do it again. But there are studies that say we all come from a single pair. Well, these studies have quite a few questions. So coming back to the question, could two people really repopulate the Earth? Well, it's possible. A small population size obviously means that sooner or later, as the relationship increases, the effects of inbreeding will become more significant. But that doesn't mean that life won't find a way somehow. The history of human civilization shows that several pockets of small survivors have managed to grow in number and overcome the mathematical probabilities behind genetics. For example, the Hutterite community in North America. This community descends from only 18 families, and in reality, despite the evidence of short-term effects from low genetic diversity being very strong, they remain probabilities. As long as the apocalypse doesn't destroy the foundations of modern civilization, as long as this couple has all the facilities to survive, that is, if one of them gets appendicitis, for example, there's a robot there to remove it safely, or the other person is trained to do this type of operation. Or as long as both complement each other in everything they might need, and this allows them to survive, humanity could recover surprisingly quickly. Returning to the example of inbreeding in the Hutterite community in North America, this community achieved the highest levels of population growth ever recorded, doubling every 17 years. Taking this into account, and the fact that this solitary and unique couple could be something similar, if each woman of each generation had 8 children, calculations tell us that we would return to 7 billion people and our current population crisis in just 556 years. Isn't that fascinating? No, not really? Well, many find it so. We hope you've learned something interesting about this fascinating topic of genetics and human evolution.